1989.
Go.
Yes, just talk loudly, Hunter.
When did the
What did what?
the family come to America?
When did the family come
When
to
did your
America?
family come to America?
My family came to America at the turn of the century. They were here, I believe, I'm just guessing right now. My dad was about, he must have been about 12 or 14 years of age when he came. And he was born in 1882.
What month? Do you know? They didn't write that down.
I don't know the exact, no, I don't know the month that they came. And my mother came here, I know, when she was 12 years of age. She came from Berlin.
Where was she
from
born?
The age of, she was born in Austria, in a town called, in an area called Radomyśl. Radomyśl is close to the Ural, is close to Kiev, as I understand. I'm not quite certain, but I think it is. I've said many times that we had that noble blood in our system, you know, that some Polish count or Ukrainian count went to our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, and as a result of that, they have this lineage with light hair.
Who else has light hair?
Josiah has light
Hey,
hair.
who has blue eyes?
Daddy.
So that was it. So let's see, let's try to figure it out. If Grandpa was born in 1882, that is Grandpa Reuben, your great-grandpa.
Reuben Graff.
Yes. And his wife was 2 years younger, Dora Graff.
She was born 1884.
Yes. So that would be at this particular time in life approximately
107 and 105.
right. And that was about the same age as Grandpa Joe later. Was about the same age as Grandpa Reuben Graff.
Really?
Yes. Well, the one came from deep Russia. Grandpa later came from Odessa.
Oh, he came from Odessa?
Yes, around the seaport.
Yeah.
And our people came from Austria.
Yeah.
At that time, Franz Josef was the emperor, and it was the Austro-Hungary Empire. So we're Austrian-Hungarians.
That's good.
What's the next question, you say?
Why did they come to America?
Well, I think that as I talked to my grandmother, and I remember speaking with her on one particular time, I asked her, she was an old lady at that time. My grandmother, Sarah.
Was Sarah who?
Schnorr, Graff.
Graff.
Yes, I'm named after my grandfather.
Her maiden name was Schnorr?
Schnorr, yes. And you had a cousin here, by the way, Vicky, and Sid, I believe it was Sid. But he was the anesthesiologist at Mount Sinai. He went on out to the West Coast years ago. But he was from Canada, she was from New York. Her family was the Haber family. Haber married a Schnorr. That's related to the Braff side. My mother was an Eisenberg. And my father came from Dempitz. My mother came from Radomyśl. These are names that are actually
Are they cities that still
European
exist today?
names. No, I wanted to say that my grandmother Sarah told me that they came over here because there really wasn't. They were concerned about what was going to be in Europe, you know, being conscripted and so forth. But also the fact that they lived on a little farm and they had a little cow, where Grandpa Braff came from, Grandpa Reuben Braff, your great-grandfather.
What did his father do for a living? His father was a farmer?
Well, I think I don't know exactly what they did. Oh, his father was a tailor.
Oh, sorry.
His father was a tailor. And I must say that
He won't stop.
He was supposed to have been a very, very wonderful, very fine person.
You never met him?
I was named after him, so as a result of that, I wasn't named after. I never met him. No,
Did he come to the United States?
And he was Pardon me?
Did he come to the United
Oh
States?
yes, he was here in the United States. He came over here. He may have come ahead of his family. I don't know. I'm not quite certain on that count. I know that. But what else did you have? But anyway, they came over here primarily, I guess, for a better life. There was a wave in 1910. You know, wherever it came from, they were part of that grouping. So at the turn of the century, they both came over. If grandmother was 12 when she came over here, she left her city when she was about 10, her area, and went to work in Berlin as a housemaid. 10 years of age.
On her own?
On her own.
Really?
She would have been like Jordan's age.
To meet her fares so that she could board a ship to come over here. So for 2 years. And my mother was a very, very bright woman.
She was very blonde. Was she blonde or red?
She was blonde. She was, not, well, you see, my memory of my mother and
She probably had white hair.
she was prematurely gray like Aunt Rosalie was.
Oh, was she?
Yeah, but she was light haired. She had fair hair.
Mom!
The picture of the four, when she had the 4 children, she seemed like it was light hair. Her hair looked like light.
She was light haired, yeah. Her skin was very fair. The Braff's skin were fair, but they were dark. Anyway, I was getting back to the fact that she was 12 when she came over here. What year would she have come in?
96.
Pardon me?
96.
And that's about the same time that Grandpa Reuben came over here. Then when they came to Cleveland, I believe in about 1905.
Together? Wait,
They
just
were
like,
married. They met each other. They were at a dance hall in New York. They were champion dancers.
really?
Yeah, your grandmother Dora and that. Just like you go to dancing school. And she and Grandpa were dancing. They were nice people. Saying about your great grandfather. I went to a funeral for one of our relatives, my Uncle Ed Brad. That was Grandpa's younger brother. And at the funeral they were talking about a saintly man. He was the most lovely man you'd ever want to meet. And it turned out I thought they were talking about my father, because he was a kindly, good person. They were talking about Grandpa's father. And the one that was there was Al Braff's sister. Those were cousins of ours. Al Braff was a manufacturer, garment manufacturer in New York. A very nice person.
How was he related to you?
He was Grandpa's first cousin. The Braffs, by the way, the Braffs spelled their names in different ways in New York. There were some that spelled it B-R-A-A-F, and some that spelled it B-R-A-F-F. And our name was originally was B-R-A-W. The German, the German pronunciation of W is F. 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 It's like a bond. W is F. So it was Braff was our name, really. But that was always our name. There was no...
No, it wasn't shortened.
No. Braff. And it was B-R-A-W. So the name was actually, when it... and Braff, by the way, in German, means brave man, good man, nice man. So I was saying about Al Braff's sisters, they were talking about our grandfather, and his Jewish name was Peretz, and I was named after him, and so was my cousin Paul Haber, whose mother was a Schnorr. That was Grandma's, Braff's family side. Paul was named after my grandfather. I was named Peter, and he was named Paul. Something like Peter, Paul, and Mary Ford, you know? And because it was Peretz, was our Jewish name.
He named you Peter on your birth certificate?
On my birth certificate, it's Peter, right?
But then why they called you Philip though?
Yeah, they call me Philip. Yes, call me Philip. As a matter of fact, I couldn't get into the naval officer program because my birth certificate said Peter on there, and I had to act very quick. It was the V7 program. I would have probably been in the naval officer group. I tried to get in all those groups, but we had a problem with the birth certificate during the war. My brother, Uncle Bill, your great Uncle Bill, was running around trying to get it changed, but nothing really helped very much. It took time. But I'm trying to get back to the Braff girls were our cousins. It would be like my second cousin, because it was Grandpa, Ruby's first cousin. They spoke so highly of our great-grandfather, who, as they say, was a tailor, but was a very, very lovely man, you know, and a very fine man. Go ahead. I will tell you about our other grandfather, who was a Rascallion in Europe.
Eisenberg.
Yeah, Grandpa Eisenberg was a manufacturer in Europe. And Mrs. Venig's father, you know, Sertz Venig, he worked for our grandfather. By the way, our grandfather had a red beard, I guess. They were all redheads. The Eisenbergs were all redheads. Fair-skinned redhead, reddish-blonde family. Evidently, our grandfather did something wrong. I don't know what it was. And Wolf Zoller, who was a very pious man, by the way, Mrs. Venig's father, they were close with your grandmother Dora. They were children together. Sertz was about a year or two older. But anyway, he told the law, and Grandpa Eisenberg ran off and left his family and headed in the direction from Europe, I guess, over to Chicago, which we never did find out where the Rascallion went off to.
So he left your mother?
He left my grandmother.
How old was your mother when he left?
But he left your grandmother. How old was your grandma when?
Well, I guess he had a hurry to leave of Europe for whatever he did. I don't know.
Well, how old was your mother when he left the family?
Well, my mother, I don't know. I would assume that she was about 10 years of age.
How
I
many
don't know.
How many other children were in the family?
Oh, there was. They had. I believe that the oldest. We had relatives. They had. We had relatives in Europe. My mother had a brother left over there, and grandfather's Braff's family had whatever the little house or farm or whatever it may have been. You know, they were left there. The rest kind of like migrated. In my mother's family, there was that I know of was my Uncle Jack Eisenberg, Uncle Max. Uncle Max was the only relative that we had. He came to Cleveland, I guess, to be near Mother. Uncle Abe Monheim brought him, and Sarah Monheim was the baby of the family.
Her name was Eisenberg?
Her name was Sarah. Anyway, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Abe had Dorothy and Sidney. That's Dorothy and Sidney's mother.
What's her name?
Uncle Abe.
Sarah and Abe had
Sidney and Dorothy. Then there was Aunt Nitty, and they took me to see Aunt Nitty.
She lived in New York?
She lived in New York. And Aunt Nitty, first there was Aunt Rivka. Aunt Rivka was the epitome of the East Side. Her husband, I can't remember their last name, but her husband was a baker. They had a little bakery, and they lived upstairs of their bakery on the Lower East, on Orchard Street, or Winthrop, one of those places, yeah. And they had 3 children, I think. And Nettie was exquisite. I saw her. She had a much finer nose than my mother. Finer nose than you. That was Aunt Nettie. I saw her. Uncle Abe and Aunt Sarah took me to meet her. Her name was Garfield. Her husband did very, very well in manufacturing.
That was your mother's sister?
Mother's sister. And Nettie was, I believe she was younger than my mother. First there was Aunt Rivka, then Aunt Nettie. Aunt Rivka's husband was the baker. They had the bakery on the Lower East Side. Aunt Rivka was a beautiful woman, beautiful, big blue eyes. The same with Aunt Nettie, finest featured nose, turned up nose, you know. Mother's nose was a little more broader, you see. They all looked like they're Slavish. They were beautiful people. On both sides of our family, they were beautiful. The Braffs were handsome people. They're all Romanesque in their nose, except Uncle John. Uncle John had a little extended nose. You were very nice with him, remember, Dory?
No
Uncle
doubt.
John and Edie.
I was only
And
3
listen,
years old.
I want to just divert a little bit. At that particular time, when we were together with Uncle John and Aunt Edie, it was at, I believe
Had to
it
be
was,
1958.
I think it was at the, where was it?
Roosevelt
Roosevelt, okay, we were eating there.
in New York.
Yeah, Uncle John would tell me though, you know, they were composers and he was a writer and he taught at City College and he was a court reporter and they did everything. But they were very, very talented, bright people.
Did they have children?
John had one child, Edie was his second marriage. He told me that they lost out quite a bit to Irving Berlin. They sent a lot of songs to them, a lot of other composers. I will never forget this. And they pretty much robbed them of their songs and that, and gave them a meager amount of money, you know.
Oh, did he
And that was the
really?
end of the songs. Right. They were very talented, very bright people. Edie played a guitar, I think, or some sort of instrument, you know. But they were composers and writers. And this, he said, was going on consistently in Tin Pan Alley.
That's interesting.
So when you hear, that kind of takes away from you. When you hear Irving Berlin wrote 1,000 songs, you know, of all different makes. I'm wondering who the young writers were and composers.
Brigade, yeah.
You see? Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we bring that up right now because Irving Berlin just died the other day. Getting back again to our family. So you had, on the Eisenberg side, you had Grandma, Dora Braff, and you had Aunt Nettie, who was, rather Aunt Rivka, who was the oldest that I know of. And then there was Aunt Nettie next to Grandma. And there was, I believe, Uncle Jack and then Uncle Max in age. I'm not quite certain which one was for. There were 5 in their family. And then in the Braffs, we had, there was, your grandfather had an older brother, Nathan, who was equally as handsome fella. And he took me one day up to his house, which was very interesting in Brooklyn. I came there in the 40s, and he played the Birds and the Bees for me like Jack Benny, while his wife was sitting in their room up there gambling with her girlfriends. Said, "Here's your nephew, Pootie from Cleveland. Hi, Pootie." They all looked and went back to their cars. But anyway, Uncle Nathan was a violinist and also, I think, a design, what do they call him, a cutter. That's what he did. Uncle Ben.
Did they have children, Nathan?
Nathan had, I believe, three sons. But Uncle Ben, we knew more than all the rest, Ben Braff, because he came to Cleveland. He sold dresses for a high fashion dressmaker. You would love that because it was one of the fine styles. And the only store that he sold in Cleveland, he sold maybe one store or 2 stores, depending on the side of the city. The only one in Cleveland was Halley's. They're fine dresses. And he and Jack, who was the general manager of Halley's at that time, Mr. Jack, were very close friends. And I remember Uncle Benny because he was not only handsome and suave and wore these pinstripe suits, and we were, you know, like meager sort of people. He used to give me $1. He'd come in and give me $1, Josiah.
Gee, that's a lot of money,
Uncle Benny,
Josiah.
oh my God, Uncle Benny would give, it was like a silver $1 too, I remember. And we sat at his legs and he would tell us all, oh, by the way, there's something else I wanted to tell you. Your grandmother and grandfather, every year, religiously, if not once, maybe twice a year, went to New York to visit their relatives. Because the only relatives we had here in Cleveland was Uncle Max and Aunt Henrietta. That was the only one we had here.
Did you go with them to New York, or they went on their own?
No, they took me to New York one time, and I can recall being the age of maybe 3. Can you imagine that? sitting on some big policeman's desk where I got lost in the Lower East Side. It stays in my memory. Evidently, I was lost there, and there I was sitting up on. It was like almost like a judge's desk. You see how the judge sits up there? I can recall that sitting up there, and they came and they found me. I remember that. It stays with me. I was born in a hospital, I guess. I was the only member of my family to be born in a hospital, being the youngest in my family. And yes, I was born at St. Luke's Hospital. At that time, when I was born, why St. Luke's Hospital was on Carnegie Avenue.
When it was later what, Doctor's Hospital?
I don't remember. Polyclinic, I think. So I was born in St. Luke's Hospital.
But you were the only one of your siblings born in the
Only
hospital.
one there. Only one born in the hospital. Everybody else was born at home. Go ahead, Josiah.
When were you born?
I was born September 23rd, 1920. My mother went on a streetcar, which stopped in front of her on Carnegie Avenue, the hospital. She fasted all that day because it was Yom Kippur. And then I guess, I don't know what time I was born. I don't have the facts on that, but I know that she fasted all the day. So whatever it was on, at that time it was Yom Kippur, September 23rd, 1920.
That was 69 years ago yesterday.
69 years. Yes, I'm 69 years young, right?
Yeah. What's the next question?
How many children were there in your family?
Well, in our family, there was originally 8 children. 2 of them, I don't know how they went by wayside, but they're not here. So there were 6 in the family. There were 3 boys and 3 girls.
When were the other ones? Were they older?
I would assume that they were older than I, yes.
Well, but they were older.
I was kind of like Mistake by the Lake, you see, being really came. Your grandmother Betty and I were the babies in our family, and well, let's see now. How old would Grandpa and Grandma be? They were not that old.
105 and 107.
Yeah, so that wasn't that old, and that's not too bad. 37 and so forth. That's something, yeah. Anyway, okay, go on, Josiah.
Who were your parents?
What?
Who were your parents?
Reuben and Dora Braff.
What were they like?
Oh, they were wonderful. My parents were wonderful. My dad was just a good man. A good man. He just expressed love. Everybody that met him loved him. He worked at Prince Biedermann, and he was a foreman over there. And he had 125 girls, Josiah, that worked for him. 125.
Under him.
When he...
But tell him what Prince Biedermann was.
Prince Biedermann was a big manufacturing company that manufactured cloaks and suits and for the ladies. Coats and suits. I use the word cloaks because they did, in fact, manufacture cloaks also. And there was a Mr. Prince and a Mr. Biedermann. And they were the founders of the company. And my dad, as Uncle Bill tells me, was, in the early days, they had a fellow there, a general manager by the name of Hoffman. And my dad would not, the family went away during the big strike out to a farm. I don't recall this year because it was prior to my time. My dad, they would call him, a scab or something like that because he worked. He was one of the management firm that stayed on and worked, but it was the big strike in Cleveland. It broke the garment industry. Cleveland equaled almost to a degree New York as a major manufacturer of garments. That is ladies' clothing of all kinds. And so your great Uncle Bill told me he couldn't look at my dad because he didn't have very much respect for him. Because my dad was offered, when Hoffman was offered the job to go over as the general manager, vice president of Richmond Brothers, he wanted my dad to come along as his assistant. And my dad turned it down. He didn't want, all he wanted to do was to provide bread on the table for his family. That's all he wanted. Then the other thing that Uncle Bill said, they were hiring and firing superintendents of the big plant, because the big plant superintendent at that time, Prince Biedermann, had maybe 1,000 workers, 500 to 1,000 workers. And your great-grandpa Ruby was offered the job as superintendent, and he turned that down because they were hiring and firing superintendents, you see. He refused to make a move upward, and it bothered your grandmother because she had business acumen, and she had friends that were in business, and she wanted to go, but Grandpa would never want to do that. He wouldn't do that, so that's where we stood with that. But we had a great deal of love in our family. Oh boy, did we have love. My love sometimes was getting beat up.
Do you remember your grandparents?
I only had one grandmother that I remembered.
New York.
My mother's grandmother died in New York. They were both in New York, but Grandma Braff I remembered very well. I would go visit with her. I stayed there, and she lived with her daughter.
What was her
only
name,
daughter,
Sarah?
Sarah. And cousin Paul Haber, I said, he's a doctor. They were two Haber boys. They were both very prominent doctors in New York. They moved out to the West Coast. I don't know what he does. They're probably retired by now, but they were brains of the highest magnitude. And they're both doctors on the West Coast, but I don't know what they're doing now. Yeah.
Did they all live in the United States?
Who's that? My
Your
family?
grandparents?
He answered that already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I answered they lived in the United States for that.
Where did you live when you were a little boy?
I can't hear you.
Where did you live when you were a little boy?
Well, I lived on 90th and St. Clair. And then we moved to Mrs. Bloom's. Mrs. Bloom lived on Estherbrook. I think I must have been when they brought me home from the hospital, they tell me, I don't really know, but they put me in a drawer, we had drawers. We lived in an apartment on 90th and St. Clair. And so my bed was, they pulled out the drawer.
There wasn't
and I was
enough
in the
beds, Josiah.
Yeah. So then we moved to Estherbrook, which had enough beds, I guess. But I remember also at Estherbrook, I had the bumps and the measles. I must have been a tough guy. I was really tough. I wouldn't stay in bed, I wouldn't stay in. And when we were little boys, they used to come around with a sign that said quarantine, They would
We
have
had
big
signs.
measles on there, and so people would not go near it. It was infectious. I ran out and so forth, away, not out of the house so much, but up and down the stairs and all around. And I can recall this day there was a man living downstairs. He was the son-in-law of Mrs. Bloom.
Did you
His
live
name
in a
was-
two-family home?
Two-family, yes. His name was Abe Ammon. And Abe, he frightened the devil out of me all the time. He and, Frida I liked pretty well, but Abe was, he would always chide me. Later on I saw him. He was part of the Kleiman firm, He was one of the presidents, by the way, of Beachcom, Abe Ammon. By the way, he died, I guess, a poor man. Or he didn't die a poor man, he died and she became poor. So, that was on Estherbrook that I'm telling you about. That was
And
the
then where
second
did you
one.
move?
Then from Estherbrook, we moved to Yale 93rd. Go ahead. Yale 93rd, that was fantastic. That was right next to the Yale lot. And you know who lived there? The Kravitzes lived on one side. The Saperstones, they had the printing shop right across the street over there. They were making this American greeting card. The Kravitzes had a big sugar place, Benny and Oscar Kravitz and their parents. They were all friends of them. I was friends of the twins. And the Hirsches lived behind us. And by the way, in 90th and St. Clair, where I was born, after the hospital where I came to live, they started by 1920, right in a garage across the street from us, not too far, the Lovemans. And they had Burdett Oxygen Company. They were prominent people. All kinds of people lived around there that were later became heads of a lot of things. It's interesting.
It's interesting.
Where did you go to school and what was it like?
Oh, my schooling was wonderful. I first started at Miles Standish, which was a lovely school. That's when we lived on Yale Avenue. And then we moved from Yale Avenue to Lakeview. We moved, I guess because, it was easier for Grandpa to catch the streetcars. They were closer.
Did you have a car?
No, we didn't have a car at that time. Grandpa went on the streetcars. So he went to 123rd and Superior. I think his plant moved to 55th and Euclid, right on, or 65th. Prince Bean moved. And so we moved to Lakeview, and we were close to, by the way, about fourth cousins of ours also. Mrs. Friedman lived on Tuscarora. We lived in the corner of Lakeview and Tuscarora. And there again, we had a lot of.
Were all your brothers and sisters still living at home at that point?
They were all living at home except, yes, they were all living at home.
And Ethel wasn't married yet?
No, Aunt Ethel got married, Mrs. Bloom. Uncle Max used to come and visit Mrs. Bloom. He was a kind of studious guy, Uncle Max.
They were lots like.
Yeah, they were from the same area in Russia. No, they were Lithuanians, and commonly known as Litvoks, you know, like the Ratners and so forth. And so Uncle Max, at Aunt Ethel, met Uncle Max. It was like a fix-up wedding, you know. She was weighing in about 185 at that time. She said it was because she worked in the chocolate stores and selling chocolates around sweets. That's why
She's all of 5 feet tall.
Yeah, whatever it was. But anyhow, they got married there, and I was the ring bearer. Like Hunter was the ring bearer for Aunt Estee, I was the ring bearer for my sister. And Grandpa made me my clothing, all silks and velvets and so forth.
Well,
Grandpa was a great tailor and all that. He made all of my sisters their clothing and stuff. He was wonderful, creative.
Alright, next question.
what was it like when you were growing up?
It was wonderful. I ran around like the last of the Mohicans. Nobody really bothered me. I knew that they knew I was around. Grandma would call late at night, you know, and I'd be coming off of the roof somewhere where I was jumping or climbing. I can remember that on Yale Avenue. It was a wonderful time. I had a wonderful growing up period. I grew up a little kind of like wild. Yeah.
What is the earliest memory you have?
Earliest memory, I've got a lot of early memories. I can remember the man climbing under the bed for me when I must have been about 3 1/2 on Estabrook. A tall fellow. He worked for the city. They were taking me away to the hospital because I wouldn't stay in bed with the mumps or measles or whatever I had, you know. And I also remembered, I must have been about maybe 2 1/2 when I was lost. I can recall this day sitting on that policeman's high desk in New York City on the Lower East Side. Isn't that something?
They do movies about children like that.
Yeah.
And then they all start singing.
Right.
They're musicals.
Uh-huh.
You have any more
That's
questions?
That's all.
He threw it away. Well, that was it, you see. So there were 6 in our family, 3 boys and 3 girls, which Grandpa was the youngest, and Ethel was the oldest. And Ethel is living today, she's 84. And Grandpa is the youngest is living, and Uncle Benji's living. He's 5 years my senior, he's 5 years older than I.
74. He'll be 74 in November.
Yeah. My mother died when she was turning 66, and Aunt Helen died at 65. And Grandpa had a stroke as a result of a prostate operation at the Cleveland Clinic. He got that. That was in 1948. So he lost his speech and the use of his right side. But he came back, walked around and all that.
He walked around like he was like that for like 8 years?
7 or 8 years, yeah. We brought him home dead. They said he was going to die. So we took him out of the hospital. Coumadin came and saved his life because the second stroke hit in his leg. And at that time, the Coumadin, or the blood thinner pill, had just come out. And the clinic was one of the first ones that received it. So we have to thank that little bit.
You lived with Aunt Rose after that?
Aunt Rose took care of him. Yeah, that's Aunt Rose. Aunt Rosalie was very, she was nice.
Family oriented.
Yeah, very nice, Aunt Rosalie. We had a family that had a great deal of love for one another, Josiah. There was a strong relationship, even though maybe some of us were not close to that, you know, they had their own friends, they went their own way, but we, just like you love your brothers, you know, sometimes. You know? Well, it was the same thing.
He does
with
love his
Grandpa.
brother.
Yeah, sure he does. One day you'll appreciate them even more than your mommy and daddy. But my mother and dad, everyone in our family had an unusual feeling toward their mother and father. Each one. And of course, being the youngest, when I went away to college,
Did any of your other
Peggy-
brothers or sisters go to college?
Uncle Benji, he made Ohio Northern, then he went to Ohio State. And then Grandpa Joe called, he and Dizzy later, he roomed our cousin Irv later, I guess, they were sleeping. Yeah, okay, I'll stand up. Now it says stand up and put your jacket on. The thing that,
Grandpa's tall.
yeah, thing that I
So
want
tall
to
in the
say,
film,
yeah,
huh?
thing that I'll be tall in the picture.
Yeah.
Uncle Ben College.
Yeah, Uncle Ben, he went partially to college. Grandpa went to Ohio University, which was a little farm school down in Athens, Ohio, you know? And I had an unusual situation that took place. I tried to get in during the service into about everything that I could possibly get into. I tried to get in the Marines. I tried to get in the Air Force. I tried to get in the Navy. I was too small to get in the Marines. Is it all finished?
Nope.
No, he asked if you got into the Secret Service.
Oh, there, I wouldn't tell you about that. Yeah.
Ask Grandpa if he was in the
Yeah.
Secret Service, Josiah.
Were you in the Secret Service?
Not in the Secret Service.
Were you
but-
with
How
the
about the
OSS,
CIA?
with the CIA?
No, well, let me explain something to you. You see, I try to get into all of these branches of the service. And I was concerned very much about whether or not I would be able to get into the branches of the service. Now the Marines turned me down because you had to be 5'8". I'm talking now in terms of officer school. See, so I didn't quite make that. I was about 5'6" something, 5'6". Anyway,
Grandpa and Daddy are the same height, Josiah.
is it 5'6"?
Yes.
Well, I'm getting a little smaller now, I think, though. Anyway,
You look smaller than
I
Fisher.
tried to get into the Air Forces. And so I had a friend who was an optometrist, and he got me a book. I found out in my junior year at college that I had a slight red-green color deficiency. So he got me the book of the Sudis Chromatic Colorblind Test book that had numbers and dots inside of it. And I memorized those numbers and dots backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards. And also what I did, Josiah, and it just goes to show, because it's certainly not there with the brains, I got every possible method of testing, like Daddy would study for his college board exams, you know. Well, they put out all these Air Force books and all these Army books to take your, like you run your SATs, you know. And I crammed up on that over and over and over and over. Boy, did I cram up on that. So I went down and they took the Air Force test, and I whizzed through everything down there, except that when I came to take this colorblind test, they brought out that book, the very same book that I would, and I called the numbers absolutely right. You know what, Josiah? Because I did that, the next thing they gave me was the blood pressure test. Not because of that, but it was just in the order that they gave it in. And my blood pressure must have been about 170, 180. I couldn't get that down, or my pulse and that. They knocked me out of that, so it wasn't meant to be. I got knocked out of that. But I had studied that examination so much over and over and over. It was the same way with the color. I was really up for that stuff. If anyone would give it to me, it was like Mommy getting her tutoring with math. When they gave you those things, it just fell right in line. Whatever. If you would ask me anything after that, I wouldn't know anything. But I went. So the only thing that was left to get into was the enlisted reserve corps. So I enlisted in the Army, and they didn't call me up. And I took their test, you know, and I got an unusually high score. Boy, was they thought something, here's something that's must be genius, you know. But it was really not genius. It's just that I memorized the thing. It's like you go over and over and over and over and over and over and over, just that. All these things begin to fall in line. It was just like duck soup. I got that high grade, that when I got in that service, Josiah, you know what they did?
What?
They singled me out and sent me over to Ohio State University. I was at Camp something or other in Columbus. I can't think of the camp, whatever they inducted them over there. And they sent me over to Ohio State and put me into organic chemistry. And I lived in the state, organic chemistry, I wouldn't know the beginning from the back. And I lived in the stadium, and the Buckeye Club, and I went to a group called the Army Specialized Training Group. From there, after a month and a half, they sent me to Yale. They wanted me to go on to graduate school and be a doctor or a dentist or whatever it might be in the profession, because they thought that here was something or other. So I spent about a year or so at Yale, about a year at Yale in the graduate school. It was interesting and lovely and fine. And then, from there, I went to Camp Grant in Illinois, where I studied in the Army Specialized Training Corps. And that was to revive people in their, when they were injured or something. I handled patients in their physical reconditioning program, principally with the mentals that were cracking up in that, how to bring them back. We were copying the German plan of getting them out of bed quick, immediately, or giving them exercise and so forth, which now they're finally catching up with here. You see, they don't keep in what we had done that at that time. And then Josiah, there came a time when I went overseas, and I went to India. And in India, way up in the remote corners of Assam in India, right close where they're building the Burma Road. They were falling asleep, and that's where the fellow we met at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Do you remember that,
He was up around
Saya?
Jorhat and he was flying the hump, and I was taking care of those people, building the road and flying the hump at a little station hospital. And then from there, I went up to Calcutta, transferred out when the first opportunity came, because it was really in the jungles and tea gardens over there, and I wanted to get away from that. And there I had the most fantastic experience, because I went to the University of Calcutta for about 18 weeks. They allowed the GIs, where you go to take a course, and I studied Hindustani, and I studied economics, and I studied some other things that were very interesting. And so I became kind of like involved in things that were very interesting. And I had a lot of time on my own over there. They gave me a lot of time to do things that I wanted to do.